Hello everyone, Mr. B coming at you with the Ancient Egyptian and Kush Civilizations Unit Test. So this test has 20 questions, including 4 multiple choice questions. Yes, 4. So we're going to get right to it. As always, we're going to start at the message board, and we need to get the study guide. So we're going to go to the study guide tab right here, and we will go to Unit 5, Ancient Egypt and Kush, and click on the study guide, which can be found here. Now that we've got the study guide open, of course, we need to make a copy because this is my copy. If you like a Google Docs version, if you have Gmail, you can go to File, Make a Copy. When you hit Make a Copy, this little window will pop up. You can rename it, add your name in there, whatever you want. Hit OK. It'll open the file in another window, and that will be your copy. Again, that's if you want a Google Docs version and you have Gmail. So you go to File, Make a Copy. If you prefer a Microsoft Word or maybe a PDF, you can go to File, Download, Microsoft Word, PDF. And yeah, when you hit that button, it will download a copy of the study guide in that file format to your computer. Then you can open the file on your computer. You can type in it. You can save it just like you would any Microsoft Word or PDF. So again, File, Download, and then choose your file type. All right, so let's get right to the study guide. Again, 20 questions. Let's get to it. Question number 1. What allowed Egyptian farmers to produce a surplus amount of food? That would be the Nile River flooding every year. So every year the Nile River floods. It puts this silt into the soil, which makes the soil really fertile. And then you can grow crops in that soil really well. On top of that, the Egyptians developed irrigation. Irrigation lets them manage water, control water, and move water to where they need it. So now they can kind of grow crops in land that it was hard to get water to before. And now they can expand their farmland, and they're able to grow just a ton of crops and get really rich trading those crops to neighboring civilizations. Question number 2. Correctly list the Egyptian social structure from beginning at the top. That would be the pharaoh at the top. Remember, the pharaoh is considered a god, so he's obviously at the top all by himself. Then you have the priests, scribes, the merchants, and the farmers. And then even below the farmers, the very, very bottom would be the slaves, right? So there you go. Question number 3. What was important about the story of Horus and Seth? So this story was important because this is the story behind the idea that the Egyptian pharaoh was a god. So I mentioned that in the last question. The Egyptian pharaoh was considered to be the embodiment of the god Horus. And this story of Horus and Seth kind of tells how that took place, how that all came to be. Question number 4. What were hieroglyphics? What was papyrus? And how did those two things impact the growth of ancient civilizations? So first, hieroglyphics were a form of Egyptian writing. It was kind of a writing with pictures and different symbols. And then papyrus was a plant that grew along the Nile River. And with the papyrus plant, they were able to make it into a very early form of paper. So now you have a writing system, you have paper. How can these things impact the growth of a civilization? Well, hieroglyphics and paper allowed information to be preserved, allowed it to be written down, and it was much easier than, writing it on a stone tablet or writing it on a statue or something like a lot of people were doing in Mesopotamia, writing in these clay things. Paper, it's lightweight. You can put it in your pocket, put it in a bag. You can transport it. So not only could they more easily record information, they could also share that information much easier with papyrus paper, right? Question number 5. How was Kush's location beneficial to its kingdom? So Kush was located south of Egypt in Africa. And Kush's location was beneficial because they were along the Nile River, and this allowed them to be a trading link between Egypt and the rest of Africa. So Egypt is way in the top northeast of Africa. It's at the very top. And Kush is below them. So all the civilizations in Africa that are below Kush can act as a middleman between Egypt and all these other civilizations. So that kind of made them rich because they were the link between the richest, biggest civilization and all these other civilizations that wanted to trade and work with Egypt. So Kush kind of played the middleman in that relationship. Number 6. Who was responsible for recording information and maintaining records? In ancient Egypt, that would be a scribe. So that person was known as a scribe. And we still use that word today, right? So a scribe still means a person who records information and maintains records. Question number 7. What was the capital of the Kush Empire, and what advantages did the capital's location have? So the capital was Meroe, and Meroe's location was important because it was by natural resources and trade routes. So by natural resources, we're talking iron. And iron deposits, that is, metal. So they had a lot of that resource, which they could trade with other people, mainly Egypt, for food. Because Egypt had a ton of food, and Egypt wanted these precious metals, right? They were all into, making tools and weapons and inventing things and architecture. They needed these resources. So Meroe's location was great because they had access to that natural resource of iron. And again, also, they were a trade center because of their location between Egypt and the rest of Africa, right? Meroe was kind of that center where everybody came to trade in Africa, especially, the Egyptians trading with the other civilizations in the south. Number 8, how did discoveries in the fields of astronomy and mathematics help Egyptian farmers? So this is really interesting. So what the Egyptian farmers would do is they would use astronomy and mathematics to first know when to plant the crops and when to harvest the crops, right? They kind of developed the calendar using mathematics and astronomy. First it was based off the moon, then later it was based off the sun, and our calendar is based off the sun, and our calendar is actually a direct descendant from the ancient Egyptian solar calendar, right? They took the calendar and it kept getting improved and updated until we kind of have a version of it today. So not only that, the Egyptians would monitor the stars. They would look up in the sky and they would say, okay, when this particular star Sirius is in this particular location in the sky, we know that the Nile River is going to flood, and then we can prepare. So they would use astronomy, mathematics, not only to create a calendar so that they knew when to plant and when to harvest the food, but they would also use the stars and the location of the stars in the sky to let them know when the Nile was going to flood. So pretty interesting. Question number 9, who was Ramses II and what were his greatest achievements? So Ramses II was the pharaoh. He was probably the greatest pharaoh in ancient Egypt, and he was responsible for building grand monuments and architecture. Ramses II built more monuments, more architecture. There's more art about Ramses and created during his period than any other pharaoh. There is just a ton of stuff created during Ramses' reign because that's what he was all about, right? He also conquered people and acquired many new territories for the Egyptian Empire. So he not only expanded their territory, but he built really cool stuff on top of that territory, right? So Ramses was an important guy. Question number 10. How trade between Egypt and Kush led to them becoming blank on each other. What does that mean? So the word would be interdependent. And what does interdependent mean? Well, interdependent means that both civilizations relied on each other for goods, services, ideas. They depended on each other, right? Kush had things that Egypt needed that they couldn't get by themselves, and Egypt had things that Kush needed that the Kush people couldn't get without them. So they had, they were dependent. Kush needed these things, Egypt needed these things, and they would trade. So they became interdependent on each other. Question number 11. I know we're moving fast, it's just because, I'm trying to get this video done, and we've got 20 questions to get through, and this recording program only lets me record 15 minutes. So we got to go fast. If you have to pause and all that good stuff to get the answers down, I completely understand, of course. 11. How did the Egyptians attempt to overcome death and prepare for the afterlife? They did that in several ways. The first, they attempted to beat death by preparing for the afterlife, mainly by preserving their bodies, right? So we talked a lot about the mummies. They would create the mummies. That was a way to preserve your body so that your soul could still be connected to the body and still have the body in the afterlife. So that was how they attempted to overcome death, is they thought they would live forever in the afterlife. And if you're going to live forever, you're going to need your body. So they would preserve their bodies, and that's why you would get the mummies. Question 12. How did trade impact Kushite and Egyptian cultures? Well, trade between the two civilizations led to them adopting many aspects of each other's cultures, right? They influenced each other. Kush is like, hey, I've got this cool thing we invented. Egypt is like, hey, we have this cool idea. And they trade. So not only are they trading, raw materials like iron for food, they're also trading, ideas. They're trading, inventions and tools. And they're mixing, their cultures are mixing a lot. So they really kind of developed different aspects of each other's culture. They influenced each other, right? 13. Why did Egyptians paint the inside of tombs? They believed that if you paint the inside of the tomb, that the person who's buried in that tomb would get the objects in the painting. So if you painted some food and some luxury items and jewelry, when that person in the tomb, when he comes back in the afterlife, all those things in the painting he will get in the afterlife. So it's kind of a way to get you some possessions and get you some of your cool stuff in the afterlife. 14. Who were the Kushites and what were some of their greatest achievements? So the Kushites were a civilization in Africa along the Nile River. They were located south of the Egyptians. And some of their greatest achievements were they invented the world's first alphabet. They also built the world's first iron-working city in Africa, Meroe. So we talked about Meroe, that was their capital, and it was located by these iron ore deposits, right? So they had their whole city. It was just about, iron, and they used that iron to trade with other civilizations and get rich. 15. Describe the relationship between Egypt and Kush, and how did the relationship change over time? So in the beginning, Kush needed food, and Egypt wanted their luxury items, right? They wanted those natural resources, so they would trade. Kush gets some food from Egypt. Egypt gets some of the luxury items, the metals and the irons from Kush, and they would trade that way. Eventually, people get greedy, and Egypt said, why don't we just conquer Kush, and then we can have control over that resource? So they did. And then, eventually Kush would say, why don't we just, attack Egypt and try to take their food supplies? And they did. So that's kind of how it went, right? First they're working together, then they're trying to just kind of take each other's stuff. And yeah, eventually they, created a united kingdom of Egypt and Kush. But that's kind of how the relationship went. You've got cool stuff, let's trade. Now you've got cool stuff, forget trading, I'm just going to take it. 16. What was the soil like along the Nile River? The soil was fertile, right? The soil was fertile because the rivers flooded, put silt in the water, and it made it great for growing crops. 17. Chemistry allowed the Egyptians to create early forms of what? They had early forms of glass and mortar. Mortar is a material that you use for brick building, right? You have bricks, and you put the mortar kind of in between them, and it sticks them together, and And then glass, right? So who invented kind of early forms of glass? That would be the Egyptians. In order to construct the pyramids, what advanced skills would the Egyptians need? Well, the Egyptians would need advanced skills in engineering and mathematics, right? They need to be able to make sure that everything, fits together, that, things aren't going to crush each other with these huge weights, and they need to know how to build it. How are you going to move these big stones? How are you going to stack them so they're all aligned? So yeah, they had to have really advanced skills in mathematics and engineering. 19. Who was Hatshepsut? And what impact did she have on Egypt during her reign? So Hatshepsut was one of the few female Egyptians. She rose to power. Her husband was the pharaoh, and then when he died, the pharaoh should have passed to his son, but his son was a baby. So Hatshepsut, his wife, said, "I'll do the job," and she became a very important pharaoh in ancient Egypt. Her impact was she made Egypt rich. She really increased their wealth by increasing trade with other civilizations. So she just brought in a ton of money, and she made Egypt a really, really wealthy country. And it already was wealthy, so she just kind of made them extra rich. Question 20, the last question. What impact did Kush's lack of farmland lead to? So Kush is located south of Egypt. And though Egypt has a lot of farmland, south of Egypt there's a desert. So Kush was more in the desert part. So they didn't have great farmland. So they had to go outside to get their food, right? So the Kushites were dependent on trade for food because they couldn't really grow their own. So thankfully, you had this huge civilization, Egypt, just to the north of them, that was able to grow a surplus of food. And that's kind of how it worked, right? The Kushites were able to trade with the Egyptians for food. And the Kushites had natural resources, right? They had that iron. So they did have stuff to trade. So yeah, that's how the Kushites kind of survived, right? They didn't have farmland to grow their own food. They had to trade for food. And they traded for food with ancient Egypt. And there we go. We got under the 15-minute mark, thankfully. There's all 20 questions. If you have any questions, need any clarification, please reach out. We can discuss any of these questions individually. And yeah, good luck on the test, you all.